beginning chapter 19, A Lear Too Far. As far as intelligence or drugs, I am more willing to think this is drugs related, but I am only looking at this different now. Before, when I worked with Flair, I was threatened not to talk to anyone about Flair or about people there, but now I don't have a job and they owe me $8,000. Less than 3 weeks after Mohomed Atta and Marwan al-Shehi began flying lessons on July 6, 2000, a Lear Jet belonging to the true owner of Huffman Aviation, financier Wallace J. Hillard, 70 of Naples, Florida, was seized by federal agents at the Orlando Executive Airport after they discovered 43 pounds of heroin on board. In the drug trade, 43 pounds of heroin is known as heavyweight. We first learned of the heroin seizure during an interview with John Villada, an aviation executive in Naples who was intimately associated with Decker's and Hillard's various aviation businesses. He managed the firm's dozen or so jets, he told us, and he, too, had been shocked and amazed at the casual and arrogant way the two men dealt with various federal officials and agencies like the FAA. Decker's forged Villada's signature on a repair order, he told us, stating required repair work on the helicopter had been completed. When he discovered it, Villada said, he was legally compelled to report the violation to the FAA. When Rudy was reported to the FAA for violations, an FAA guy came out and sat down and said, I suggest you back out of this. I couldn't believe it. I called the FAA to report a violation and was warned to leave him alone. Villada dropped a bombshell. After Wally's plane was impounded with the heroin and his pilots had machine guns stuck in their faces, the DEA came to visit our maintenance facility and Wally shouted out to me, right in front of the DEA guy, make sure all the heroin and cocaine gets hidden. That was in August of 2000, when I found out later that the DEA wouldn't let him have his plane back. I knew why. Hillard's mock warning to hide the drugs, explained Villada, had been Wally's way of telling the DEA how little he thought of them. The DEA hadn't forgotten. Villada seemed surprised. We realized how wait a minute. I'm backing up. Not for the first time, we realized how puny our investigation resources were before the immensity of the story. Wait a minute. Yeah, I guess. Not for the first time. Oh, fuck, I'm ruining this. Starting over. That was in August of 2000 when I found out later that the DEA wouldn't let him have his plane back. I knew why. Hillard's mock warning to hide the drugs, explained Villada, had been Wally's way of telling the DEA of how little he thought of them. The DEA hadn't forgotten. Villada seemed surprised we hadn't heard of the bust at Wally's plane. Not for the first time we realized how puny our investigative resources were before the immensity of the story of Atta and his cadre in Florida. Itself just a part, though a crucial part, of the true story of 9/11 that has not yet been told or written. We had soon confirmed Villada's assertion. Hillard's Lear Jet had been involved in a major bust in Orlando. Authorities called it the biggest seizure of heroin ever found in Central Florida. Had Hillard been an unwitting victim, like Rudy, an innocent business owner victimized by a world he never made? Financier Hillard ran money-losing flight schools. Now we discovered he leased jets to drug smugglers too. Major drug smugglers. major drug smugglers. A story in August 2nd, 2000, Orlando Sentinel called the bust the largest find of its kind in the southeastern United States in recent years. We had thus far been preoccupied with Wally's less camera-shy partner, Rudy Deckers, the front man, when we asked ourselves what it is frontmen do. We realized the answer was deflect attention. It was time to turn our attention to the other half of the Wally Rudy equation. Because while Deckers busied himself training young Arab men to fly, his partner Wally Hillard had been running a charter service providing jets used to carry heroin, not a line of work you'd expect a retired Midwestern insurance executive to take up as a hobby on retirement in Florida. The city where the heroin bust occurred, Orlando, will figure more heavily into our story. Mohomed Atta used Orlando as a transportation hub. Bob Simpson, a yellow cab driver in Venice, took Atta by cab from Venice to Orlando several times. The FBI asked him about ferrying the terrorist ringleader. Simpson told us they'd identified him from the number of his cab, caught by surveillance cameras at the Orlando airport. Orlando's growing importance as a major transshipment point for heroin prompted Congress to officially designate Central Florida a high-intensity drug trafficking area. Heroin overdoses, we learned, killed more people in Orlando each year than anywhere else in Florida. The investigation, which resulted in the seizure of Hillard's Lear Jet, began after a Colombian national, Nassar Darwich, was arrested in Orlando with 1.3 kilos of heroin in the soles of shoes he was carrying. The Orlando Sentinel reported, Darwich promptly rolled on his bosses and cut a deal. As a result, DEA agents were waiting 2 weeks later when the Lear Jet landed at the airport on July 25th. They swarmed the plane, according to eyewitnesses, brandishing machine guns. The flight originated in Venezuela and then made a stop in Fort Lauderdale before landing in Orlando, with New York as its final destination. The paper reported passengers Edgar Valles and Naira Rivas, both of Caracas, Venezuela, were arrested. Most of the heroin was found hidden in the soles of tennis shoes stashed in their luggage. Eventually, 5 people in Orlando were convicted in connection with the seizure, including 2 Venezuelans. The pilot was not arrested, according to a DEA spokesman, because of lack of evidence, said the Sentinel. More on this sad fact in a moment. The DEA had a sad fact of their own. It confirms the sad fact that a massive amount of heroin is coming through Central Florida. U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration Special Agent Brent Eaton told the paper, "It's very disturbing to the DEA that more and more high-quality heroin is coming from Colombia and at a cheaper price." The DEA had been very disturbed, enough to look more closely at Wally Hillard's jet charter operation. The result was their firm opposition to returning the Lear to Hillard, even though no one from Hillard's company, Plane One Leasing, had been charged with any crime. DEA would not return it. They auctioned it off, they told Wally. They had reasons, said an aviation source in Naples. It was the first seizure in history for a so-called innocent person where they took and kept the plane. It appeared there was strong evidence pointing to the conclusion that, at the very least, Hillard's company knew what was going on. Affidavits later filed by the machine gun-toting DEA agents who surrounded the Lear jet indicated Hiller's company indicated in yeah I got it right. Agents who surrounded the Lear jet indicated Hiller's company involvement, which went much deeper than anyone was willing to acknowledge publicly. It was just blatant, said a manager who worked there at the time. The same plane flew that same run 30 or 40 times, ferrying the same people, and they always paid cash for the rental. The flags could not have been raised any higher. We confirmed that Hiller's Lear jet made frequent round trips to South America with an official at exclusive. We confirmed that Hiller's Lear jet made frequent round trips to South America with an official at executive jet service. The facility, which served it at Orlando Executive Airport, he said the plane made weekly down and back runs to Venezuela. It was what's called a milk run. 3 weeks after the Lear jet was impounded by the DEA, Hillard asked for it back. In a motion filed in the U.S. District Court in Orlando, he argued that he was an innocent owner, unwittingly duped by a known individual. Plane One and its officers, shareholders, and directors were not aware of the identity of the passengers utilizing the Lear 35A on this trip other than Mr. Vallis, stated Hillard's motion. The company had been unaware that the individuals charting the plane were engaging in criminal conduct. Company executives were also not aware of any facts from which they should have been aware that individuals leasing the plane were engaging in criminal conduct. A few facts about Lear Jets. It's the most popular of private jets, the ultimate accessory for celebrities, and dates back to the late 1950s when they were designed by American entrepreneur and inventor William Lear. The first Lear took off in October 1963. Today, Lear Jet is owned by Bombardier, and the planes are built in Kansas. They range in price from $5 to $12 million new. The plane, which golfer Payne Stewart was aboard when it crashed, was a Lear 35A, and Wally Hillard wanted his Lear jet back. The U.S. Attorney's Office opposed the plane's return. Their motion said, because the property was used or acquired as a result of a violation of the Controlled Substances Act, the Justice Department, through the U.S. Attorney's Office in Orlando, declined to prosecute the pilot of the plane, even though affidavits filed by the plane declined to prosecute the pilot of the plane, even though affidavits filed by the plane-side DEA agent in charge of revealed the pilot of the plane, Diego Levine, who worked directly for Hillard, the Lear's owner, had guilty knowledge and should have been charged. Even while machine gun-toting DEA agents swarmed the plane, the affidavit stated, the pilot of the aircraft, Diego Levine, frantically attempted to make a telephone call using a cellular phone. Levine ignored agents and police officers who repeatedly ordered him to drop the telephone. Agents had to physically remove the telephone from Levine hands, the affidavit continued. Based on my experience, I know that narcotics traffickers maintain frequent contact with one another while transporting narcotics and currency. I believe Levine attempted to contact other accomplices as to the presence of agents and other law enforcement officials. Picture Picture the scene at Orlando Executive Airport. DEA agents are storming the plane brandishing submachine guns, but the pilot won't get off his cell phone. Agents have to physically remove the phone from his hands. Pretty ballsy, or pretty blasé, we wondered. Who is Diego Levine? We discovered that knowledge about Diego Levine was considered, at least in some quarters, highly sensitive. But eventually, from aviation sources in southwest Florida, some information surfaced. Like Deckers and Wally, Diego Levine had a hall pass from the FAA, which might explain his casual attitude while being busted. One time in Miami, Diego got busted because he had no pilot's license, related a Naples Aviation insider. He was a terrific pilot, but he just hadn't ever bothered to get his license. He should have been in trouble, but he said the FAA lost my file, and as a courtesy, the FAA administered a 4-hour test on the spot and let him go on his way. Diego had some juice. What we heard about Diego, he flies a huge Gulfstream jet that looks like the interior of a Ritz-Carlton hotel. His father owns a big furniture manufacturer plant in Venezuela. Diego was trying to buy a Cheyenne airplane for the Venezuelan Air Force. Diego's day job was chief pilot for Venezuela's Air Force One. When he wasn't arrested flying Hillard's Lear jet, was it just a dumb luck? That's too absurd. No. What we are looking at is protected drug trafficking, CIA approved, probably dressed up as a controlled delivery. No wonder information about him was considered sensitive. Whoever he was, Diego Levine was no amateur freelancer. Diego's calls to the FAA got promptly returned. Diego is home team. Space does not allow an adequate discussion of concept that the narcotics which are distributed in the U.S. with the same precision and reshelving as any other commodity are imported through the good offices of this nation's clandestine services. There are a shelf full of books, one is ours, which explain this connection and how it is that the world's largest consumer market for one of the world's largest industries can remain hidden from federal law enforcement authorities. It can't. Here's why. The DEA affidavit confirmed the frequency of Hillard's Lear jet trips to South America. It said pilot Levine stated he had known Venezuelan Valles Diaz for approximately 9 months. He has flown Valles Diaz to New York and Fort Lauderdale approximately 30 times during that time. Levine Texar said that he and his company were paid a total of $600,000 for those trips, and that he was going to be paid $80,000 for the current trip after arriving in Orlando, the affidavit continued. 30 flights in 9 months, a weekly milk run down and back to Venezuela would have ignited grave suspicions at any legitimate charter jet company, said aviation observers. But the discovery that Hillard's operation was paid in cash for each one of the 30 flights removes any question about our enterprise's legitimacy in the unanimous opinion of aviation observers in Southwest Florida. It wasn't. Wally Hillard was involved in 2 ways. Florida records show as the principal of the Plane One Leasing, which owned the Lear Jet, involved as a partner in American Jet Charters, LLC, the charter company that leased the Lear from Plane One Leasing. Hillard was a partner and co-owner, along with Diego Levine and a man named Mark Shubin. They obviously weren't ever bothering to hide what they were doing, noted the one observer. Yet, despite being caught red handed, Wally Hillard claimed in court filings to have been an innocent owner. On November 3rd, 2000, federal judge James Glazebrook denied Hillard's motion. Yet there are no public documents explaining why. Wally took a big hit on that one, stated someone at the Naples airport. The DEA was not going to let him have that plane back. The DEA was planning on adding it to their Border Patrol fleet, confirmed a spokesman for the Lear Jets' current owner, East Coast Jets of Allenton, Pennsylvania. They bought the plane, he told us, after an insurance company, which insured it against seizure for the lender, successfully wrenched it back from the DEA after Hillard had been removed from the picture. Then we made an amazing discovery. Wally Hillard got his Lear Jet from the same people who supplied the Lear Jet 2 decades earlier, flown by famous drug smuggler and CIA agent Barry Seal. Federal records showed Hillard got his Lear Jet from World Jet Incorporated, owned by the drug smuggling Whittington brothers, Don and Bill of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, who in their heyday in the early 1980s had been historic figures in the rise of the trade, commanding fleets of fishing trawlers, sailboats, powerboats, and jets. The Whittington brothers were among the handful of major smugglers in the late 1970s and early 1980s, when tons of marijuana and the oceans of cash it created flowed freely through the streets and canals of Fort Lauderdale. When their prized Learjet was seized after their indictments for smuggling and tax evasion, it went to the man on his way to becoming the biggest drug smuggler in American history, Barry Seal. Nor was this by accident. Here we were on familiar ground. Seal was the subject of our book, Barry and the Boys, the CIA, the Mob, and America's Secret History. Until his assassination in 1986, at the reported behest of then Vice President George H.W. Bush, Barry Seal was a close associate of Iran-Contra figures like Frank Moss and Dietrich Reinhardt, who, as we have seen, are still active in the middle of all kinds of intrigue at the Charlotte County Airport. The Lear Jet confiscated in Orlando didn't get to Hillard by accident either. The man who owned it, Gary Levitz, 61, was killed in 1991 when his modified P-51 Mustang crashed during the National Championship air races in Reno, Nevada. Levitt's grandson of Levitz Furniture Corporation, founder Richard Levitz, was an avid pilot and member of the Confederate Air Force, an organization of pilots whose members fly vintage warplanes and sometimes other things as well. Gary was a pretty amazing man, one of the managers told reporters. He was a larger-than-life character. He would run the company day to day, and he flew warplanes and was a big game hunter. Gary Levitz was also a big drug smuggler. Back in the early 80s, he was convicted of money laundering with the same Whittington brothers who sold his Learjet to Hillard. Court documents said Levitz deposited large sums of money into bank accounts in Nogales, Mexico, and helped disguise William Whittington's narcotics profits by investing into legitimate business ventures. What we were seeing were clues left behind by a vast but hidden and still unnamed global network. The recently deceased Gary Levitz also had ties in Venice, Florida, with a man whose name we'd heard whispered about. Ben Bradley's, a DEA informant at the Venice airport who got arrested for beating his wife, one aviation source in Venice told us bluntly. when we first asked about Bradley. When we first asked around about Bradley, he set people up in Fort Lauderdale. He was given some of their toys Gary Levitt's got in the drug trade. He rolled on Hillard's business associates and the very definition he rolled on Hillard's business associates are the very definition of a motley crew. And we'd barely scratched the surface. An air of mystery surrounded the activities of Wallace J. Hillard, as well as unanswered questions about the terrorist conspiracy's activities in Florida. Wally Hillard is not a peripheral character in the story of the terrorist conspiracy in Florida. He denied it, but at least one eyewitness knew Mohomed Atta. During one of his periodic visits to Venice, Amanda Keller said she stood beside Hillard, looking out the window at Huffman Aviation. Hillard only came around, she told us, as an aside to meet the new... Fucking up the flow here, my God. Hillard only came around, she told us as an aside, to meet the new Jets, it seemed. I cannot speak this sentence properly, it feels like. Hillard only came around, she told us, as an aside, to meet the newer Jets, it seemed. What's a pretty girl like you doing with a guy like Mohomed? Hillard asked her. We would all, I'm sure, love to know what he meant by that. I know more about Wally Hillard than I ever want to know, said a former Huffman Aviation executive. Why do you think the U.S. military didn't close the passes into Pakistan during the Tora bombings? Tora Bora. Why do you think the U.S. military didn't close the pass into Pakistan during the Tora Bora bombings? This all goes far deeper than you think. Like many others, this executive demanded anonymity. He explained, I've got a family. Fucking up on read today. Sorry, guys.